Okay, I'm going to show you how to add and subtract unlike fractions and mixed numbers. And I want you to keep in mind that the reason why these fractions are unlike each other is because they don't have the same common denominator. And before we can add and subtract a fraction, we have to have a common denominator. We have to be looking at fractions that have the same amount of equal parts. We can't add or take away or subtract fractions when they aren't looking at the same amount of parts, which would be your denominator. So if I look at 7/15 and I want to add 1/6 to that, the first thing I'm going to do is check my denominators, and I notice that they are not the same. They are not the same denominator. So I am going to have to do what is called finding the least common denominator and then rename my fractions. So to find the least common denominator, I'm going to take 15 and 6 and put them into what I call an upside down birthday cake. And I'm going to look at these 5 numbers, 2, 3, 5, 7, and 11. And I'm going to ask myself, can any one of those 5 divide evenly into 15 and 6? And my answer is yes, 3 can. So I'm going to take 15 divided by 3 and get 5, and 6 divided by 3, which is 2. And then I'm going to ask myself again, can any of these 5 go into 5 and 2? And my answer is no. So I'm done. So I'm going to put an L around all of these numbers here, and I'm going to multiply them. So I take 3 times 5 is 15, and 15 times 2 is 30. So my least common denominator is 30. So I'm going to come back over here and I'm going to ask myself, what am I going to do to 15 to get 30? Well, if you're not sure on that, look back over here. 3 times 5 is 15. And so what did I do to 15 here to get 30? I multiplied it by 2. So I'm going to take 15 times 2. And what I do to the bottom, I must do to the top. So I'm going to take 7 times 2. And I'm going to rename this fraction into 14 30ths. Okay, so then I'm going to come down here and I am going to now rename, give me a second, sorry. I am now going to come down here and I'm going to rename 1/6. Let me erase this because there, sorry. I'm going to rename 1/6 because I'm going to take 6 and multiply it by 5. And what I do to the bottom, I must do to the top. So I get 5 30ths. And so now I'm going to add my 2. Now my denominators, I'm looking at the same number of equal parts. And so now I am going to just add 14 plus 5, and I get 19. And my denominator stays the same, so I end up with 30. And when I look at this, I'm going to ask myself, coming back to my 5 numbers, 2, 3, 5, 7, or 11, can any one of these 5 divide into this and reduce? And my answer is no. So 7/15 plus 1/6 is 19 30ths. Okay? All right, so now I'm going to erase this and I'm going to apply the same concept to subtracting fractions. Okay? So I'm going to look at 2 fractions. I'm going to look at 11/14 minus, again, 1/6. Okay? So looking at my denominators, neither one of my fractions, they do not have the same number of equal parts, so I have to get a common denominator. So I'm going to put 14 and 6 into my upside down birthday cake, and I'm going to look at 2, 3, 5, 7, and 11 again, and ask myself, of these, what can go into 14 and 6 evenly? And I find that 2 can. So 14 divided by 2 is 7. 6 divided by 2 is 3. And I'm going to ask myself again, can anything go into 7 and 3? And my answer would be no. So I'm going to place an L around all of this on the outside, and I'm going to multiply these. So I get 2 times 7 is 14, 14 times 3 is 42. So my common denominator is now 42. So I'm going to come back over here and rename my parts. So I'm going to take 14 times 3, and what I do to the bottom, I have to do to the top, because 14 times 3 is 42. And then 11 times 3 is 33. So 11/14 has been renamed to 33/42. I'm going to do the same thing to 1/6. I'm going to multiply 6 by 7. And what I do to the top, I'm going to do to the top. And so I end up with 7/42. Okay? Now again, if you can't remember what to take 14 times to get 42, look back over here and look where 2 times 7 is 14. What did I do to that 14 to get 42? I multiplied it by 3. And if you can't remember what to take 6 times, find where 2 times 3 is 6. So what's left? 7. So I'm going to multiply by 7. Okay. So now I'm going to come back and I'm looking at 33 minus 7, which is 26. Okay. Oops. Forgot to change colors there. Sorry. Excuse me. And my denominator, stays the same. So now I'm going to ask myself, can this reduce? Is there anything out of these 5 that can make this 26/42 smaller? And my answer is yes, that I can divide both by 2. So 26 divided by 2 is 13, and 42 divided by 2 is 21. And I ask myself if I can reduce that again. My answer is no. So that is 11/14 minus 1/6 is 13/21. Okay. All right. Now I'm going to show you how to add mixed numbers. Okay. So I'm going to look at 6 4/5 plus 2 3/8. So I'm going to look and notice I don't have the same number of equal parts, so I need to find the least common denominator. So I'm going to go with 5 and 8 into my upside down birthday cake, and I'm going to look at 2, 3, 5, 7, and 11 and ask myself, is there any one of these that can divide evenly into 5 and 8? And my answer is no. So when none of these work from the beginning, simply multiply your two numbers here, and that would be your least common denominator. So 5 times 8 is 40. So 40 is my least common denominator. So I'm going to come back and I'm going to rename my fractions only. So I'm going to pull my whole number 6 over and come back to my fraction and take my 5 times 8. And what I do to the bottom, I'm going to do to the top. So I take 4 times 8 and I get 32. 5 times 8 was 40. So this fraction renamed is 32/40. On the bottom, I'm going to go ahead and pull over my 2, and I'm going to take 8 times 5, and again, what I do to the bottom, I have to do to the top. So 3 times 5 is 15, and I have 40, and I'm going to add these. So now I take 32 plus 40, and I get 47/40, and 6 plus 2 is 8. Well, I can't reduce these because none of 2, 3, 5, 7, or 11 can divide evenly into 47 and 40, but I do notice that I have a top-heavy fraction. So I'm going to take 47 divided by 40. 40 can go in one time, multiply, subtract, and now I have that 7 left over. So I'm going to bring my 7, my remainder up is now my numerator, out of 40. So I've renamed this fraction, okay? So now I'm going to look at, it's no longer 47/40, it is now 1 7/40. So now I have to pay attention. I have 8 holes right here and 1 hole right here. So how many do I have altogether? 9. With 7/40 left over. So my answer to 6 4/5 plus 2 3/8 is 9 7/40. Okay, so now we're going to look at subtracting unlike mixed numbers. Okay, so I am going to look at 18 1/4 minus 7 3/5. So I'm going to look again. I don't have equal parts, so I'm going to put 4 and 5. Oops, let me change my color. Sorry. Into my upside down birthday cake, and I'm going to look at 2, 3, 5, 7, and 11. And I'm going to, does any one of these 5 go into 4 and 5 evenly? And my answer is no. So I'm going to multiply them, and I get a least common denominator of 20. So I'm going to come and rename my fractions. First, I'm going to pull over my whole number. I'm going to come back and rename 1/4, and I'm going to multiply 4 by 5. And when I do the bottom, I do to the top. So I renamed 1/4 to 5/20. And then I'm going to come down here. I'm going to pull over my whole number of 7, and I don't need to change, well, yes, I do, excuse me. So I'm going to change this number to 4, and I'm going to do this one, multiply that by 4. So I'm going to rename 3/5 to 12/20. Okay, so now I'm going to subtract. Well, now I'm going to look and see. Here it says that now I'm going to subtract numerators. Well, 5 cannot take away 12, so I'm going to have to regroup this one. And I'm going to do that by borrowing. So I borrow a whole, so that becomes 17, and then I add up. And when I do that, I'm adding 20 to 5, which in essence is really saying I'm adding another whole as 20/20, because 20 over 20 is one whole. So we can just add up. So my number here now becomes 17 25/20. And I'm going to pull over 7 12/20 because I don't need to do anything to him. And now I'm going to subtract. So 25 minus 12 is 13. Denominator stays the same. 17 minus 7 is 10. And now I'm going to look, can this reduce? My answer is no. So 18 1/4 minus 7 3/5 is 10 13/20. Okay, if you have any questions on your assignment over this, make sure you get in here and ask, and use these notes and go back over this video. I am giving you the first page of the notes where it's typed out the steps, but this video will help you to apply the steps.